our festivals, and our restaurants. From first-class health care facilities to bike paths, to access to a multitude of outdoor activities, to shopping opportunities for every taste and income level, Greater Seattle is an easy, fun, and safe place to visit and live. Greater Seattle is a great place to make part of your future. And in conclusion, I want to invite you, if you have any questions, to consult with our Greater Seattle Trade Development Alliance staff. They're here in full force at the summit. They're available out at the Business Connections desk and would be very pleased to talk with any of you that have questions. They'd be glad to assist you. Again, I say a warm welcome. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being in Seattle, and enjoy your stay.
Thank you, Shan. I'd like to acknowledge a couple of our leaders who won't be introducing, but you will see throughout the conference, and they're important members of our community. Bob Watt, who's the president of the Chamber of Commerce. If you could wave, he's sitting there somewhere. There. Turn the lights up a bit. And then Mick Dinsmore, who runs our port. Mick. See that? We have many other leaders of our community here, and I hope that you will take the opportunity to engage them in conversation and be part of the conference challenge. A quick story. We're so new in this country in Seattle that the rest of the country calls us the Pacific Northwest. And in fact, we call ourselves that occasionally. As we move to the new century, I was having an interesting dinner last night with Mayor Hong from Daejeon, and I pointed out to him that I keep explaining to people that the Pacific Northwest is really Korea, and that we here in Seattle are the Pacific Northeast, or the American Northwest, and of course those in Canada are in the Southwest. So as we think ahead, we need to be thinking about defining our regions, each ourselves, and not be defined by others, and learn to build relationships based on the true economy or the true environment or the true culture, and find ways to share that. Now you're in for a treat. Bob Herbold, who is Microsoft's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, will speak to us next. I think you'll find this very exciting. Microsoft is one of the leading forces behind the technology achievements in the Seattle region. It is also one of our summit sponsors. Bob Herbold left his position as the head of IT and marketing at Procter & Gamble in 1994 to become the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Microsoft Corporation. Microsoft is a world leader in innovation and technology research, with 40,000 employees worldwide and annual revenues of more than $22 billion. He brought financial discipline to Microsoft while managing its rapid growth in revenue, personnel, U.S. and overseas assets, and new research and improved internal operations with new software and automated communications for human resources and other services. He is retiring as the Chief Operating Officer of Microsoft, but will continue to represent the company on special projects. Please help me in welcoming Bob Herbold from Microsoft.
Thanks very much, Paul. I appreciate it. Well, we want to talk a little bit about technology here, Paul, so I'll get right with it. First of all, I want to start with the industry itself. And there's very few industries where the core components that underpin the industry continue to skyrocket in terms of their capabilities. But that certainly is what has been happening with respect to technology, and it will continue to happen. The chip is legendary in terms of increasing its capacity, and I want to talk about that in more detail in a moment. One of the things that often goes unnoticed is the tool with which all of those bits go flying from place to place, namely the optical fiber that strand of glass that is typically a lot thinner than the hair on your head. It's remarkable how the people who have the technologies that drive those bits through that piece of glass continue to believe that actually they can double the capacity with which they drive that through that glass at about 2x every 12 months. And that has been going on over the last 10 years. And in fact, the rate of acceleration in terms of that improvement has actually increased recently. The technology is called wave division multiplexing, and they're splicing light waves thinner and thinner. And so we're in for fun times in this industry. Naturally, small commercial here for Microsoft software. The software is important as well in terms of harnessing that hardware chip and harnessing your ability to move that information across that optical fiber line with incredible speed and capability. So it's the combination of the three that just continue to make this industry more and more fun. Fun defined by great applications that enable organizations to be able to serve their members better. Fun in the context of the things you can do at home as well in terms of providing great new capabilities. Let's talk a bit about that chip. You know, there's a law out there that's referred to as Moore's Law that basically says that once every 18 months you'll see an improvement of about a 2x factor. And that's named after Gordon Moore, who was one of the originators of Intel. And we've seen that kind of progress over the course of the last 25 to 30 years, and it's unbelievable. And there's always skeptics as to whether or not we can improve at that kind of pace into the future. And in fact, Gordon Moore himself was such a skeptic back in 1993. Back in 1993, the distance between the wires on that chip, that incredibly small chip, the distance between the wires and the transistors had gotten down to what's called a half a micron. You might say, well, how thin is that? How small is a half a micron? The answer is listed on the bottom of that slide. It's about 1/2000th the width of a human hair. And Gordon Moore said, yeah, these new chips are
Solidarity with the agony and anguish of people who are wounded, scarred, and bruised, with oppressed folk who are catching hell. So the question in part becomes, how do you fuse the Socratic with the prophetic? Socratic questioning with prophetic witness. Love, compassion, kindness, mercy, justice. And what a standard it is. And it's so very important in these days to talk about what the standards are, because anytime you're in a dark tunnel, you don't want to just be reminded that it's dark. So, oh, you don't say. That's a great insight. Appreciate it. No. You want to give people a sense of what the light looks like. And we're in a situation now where we need to know what has been bequeathed to us at the highest level, what we look like at our best. And Socratic questioning, a prophetic witness, in part reminds us what has so deeply shaped us such that we can, in fact, look better than we are. So that when you talk about not just the prophetic voices from the Hebrew Scripture, not just the gospel of love and justice for Christians, not just the message of mercy of Muhammad, but all of the rich secular traditions that proceed out of the ambiguous legacies of Athens and Jerusalem. And of course, the East has its own rich civilization. Indigenous people have their own rich civilizations. But one has to speak out of what has shaped one's own sense of who one is. We're all historical beings shaped by traditions in place before we made our entree in our mother's womb. And prophetic witness means then we have to be morally consistent. It's very difficult indeed. In fact, one of the problems these days that we tend to highlight maybe one particular kind of justice, but don't want to use the same critique for other kinds. You see, when the Bush administration says, you know, we want to liberate women in Afghanistan. And I say, oh, I didn't know you had such feminist commitments. I appreciate that. I do too. But I want to liberate women in Saudi Arabia too. Where's your critique there, Mr. President? Why is it that you're relatively silent about the autocratic and patriarchal rule of your best friends? I know if they had artichokes rather than oil, you'd have a different foreign policy. Let's be morally consistent. Want to overthrow dictators? What about China? What about Indonesia? You believe in the democratic process? Why are you trying to undermine Chavez in Venezuela? What are we talking about? You say you can't stand the coup. Why you support a coup in Haiti? Democratically elected president. Let's be consistent. That's the point. Mr. Rumsfeld, you say you're so concerned about Iraqi brothers and sisters. How come you didn't say a mumbling word when you shook Saddam Hussein's hand, when you shook Hussein's hand in 1983? You were there. You could have said something. Concerned about the Kurds in the north? How come you were so silent when Reagan sent you over? Why did your CIA install Saddam Hussein in 1979? Let's be consistent. And this is true about the discourse about terrorism today. September 11th. It is a serious day. I was there in New York that day, supporting the candidacy of Brother Fernando Ferrer, who's running for mayor. He's going to be the first Latino mayor in New York City. Right there in the Marriott Hotel, Times Square. I'm sure some of you at least walked by if you haven't stayed in it. I saw the second plane from 31st floor. I said, what the hell is going on? Precious lives, all colors and genders, murdered by gangsters. No doubt about that. The first thing that came to my mind was all Americans for the first time in the history of this nation feeling unsafe, unprotected, subject to random violence, and hated. It's not a good feeling. Many of my white brothers and sisters come up to me, Brother West, I just can't get over this feeling of being hated. It's just new to me. I don't feel right. I can't get out of bed right. Don't feel good at work. I said, you don't say. Really, really. Say to be a nigger in America for 350 years is to be unsafe, unprotected, subject to random violence, and hated. And it's true. And I said to myself, I said, the whole nation is niggerized now. What will be the dominant responses to niggerization? I say, I have been produced by a tradition that is on intimate terms with terrorism. Many innocent ones murdered like dogs and cockroaches. And I thought to myself, what did Emmett Till's mother say when her child was the victim of American terrorism? You all know who Emmett Till was. The young brother in August 1955 from Chicago that went to Mississippi. Whistled at a white sister. Murdered, maimed, body thrown to the Tallahatchie River. She brought his body back to Chicago, put it in the black church. The authorities told her, close that coffin, or we are going to punish her. She said, that was my only child. I refused to do it. I'm going to keep that coffin open. And 50,000 fellow citizens of all colors walked through that little black church and took a look at the consequences of American terrorism. 50,000. That was the first massive civil rights demonstration before Sister Rosa sat down to stand up for justice in Montgomery a few months later, in December 55. And then Matilda's mother stepped to the lectern and looked over at her baby, her only child. Tears flowing down her face. And what did she say? She said, I don't have a minute to hate. I'll pursue justice for the rest of my life. Now that is a level of moral maturity and spiritual strength in the face of terrorism. What did Brother Martin say when the 4 young precious girls were killed by American terrorists in Birmingham? One of the few times he cried in public. Didn't know what to say. Their parents sitting on the front row. He said, somehow we've got to muster the courage to fight this terrorism with the armor of love and justice. What a level of moral maturity and spiritual strength. If you're going to fight terrorism, don't get in the same gutter as the terrorists. If you're going to fight gangsters, don't get in the same gutter as the gangsters. Stay on a larger, higher moral ground when you fight. Nothing wrong with hunting down gangsters. Nothing wrong with finding them and bringing them to justice, but that's not revenge. That's not Lone Ranger ethics. That's not sheriff-like attacks. I said, what will be the response, the dominant response of America to their niggerization? Will this nation that now has the blues learn something from a blues people? One wonders.
I could tell she always loved him for this. Her real name was Mary Maria Elena, named after our father's mother and mother's sister. We called her Mari. Every night it was her job to make sure Panchito went to sleep. And because she was only 6, too young to sit and rock him to sleep, she jumped on the bed and bounced him to sleep while singing their song, Twinkly, Twinkly, Little Star. A few months later, I was sitting on the floor outside their room, coloring in Mari's Winnie the Pooh coloring book, waiting for Panchito to come out, and I noticed something different. No noise. It was quiet. That either meant they were sleeping or something was wrong. So I put down the coloring book and tiptoed through my bedroom and into the bathroom. As I stepped through the first door and moved through the bathroom, I heard a growl, and I stopped. I turned as Mari jumped out from behind the door, showing claws, howling and running at me. I screamed, "Ay, Mommy!" and jumped back. I scared you, she yelled as she jumped up and down. I'm just like her now, huh? Yeah, Rona's daughter, I'm just like her, she yelled. Then she stood still in front of me and looked up. She asked me in a serious voice, "Where does she live, Tere? Ya Rona?" I should go live with her, huh? It would be better, huh? She sat down and looked at the ground. I knelt beside her and said, "No, Genios, it wouldn't be better. You know La Llorona is just a story, an old story that we tease you with. Don't go. If you leave me, I'll be sad and miss you." And who would bounce Panchito to sleep? She looked up at me and smiled, then jumped up and ran into their bedroom where they began bouncing again. As I walked into my room, I felt scared for her, my beautiful little sister who saw things that most people couldn't, who was born speaking to the spirits, moving in and out of other worlds, who was already being teased at school. She looked like any normal 6-year-old, and none of us really knew how to help her. But I knew Abuelita could. So when Mari told me that Abuelita had talked to her in her sleep last night, my whispers had been answered. I knew she would be okay now. Abuelita would find a way for our Genios